Chapter 10, Basic Principles. For the technical knowledge, we have: first, to know the optional application of operating lease on the part of lessee, to recognize a right-of-use asset and lease liability in a finance lease, to understand the measurement of a right-of-use asset, and lastly, to understand the measurement of a lease liability in a finance lease.
Hi everyone, I am Riza Maya Sareno and I will be here to start the discussion here in Chapter 10.
And this is me, Adeline Josue, partner of Misa Sereno, to discuss the other parts of this chapter. Let's start.
Lease. IFRS 16 is the new lease standard. So, kaya siya nasabi na IFRS 16 is the new lease standard kasi before PAS 17 yung sinusunod na standards pero nawala na siya. And ito na nga yung pumalit. Then, under IFRS 16, a lease is defined as a contract or part-to-pay contract that conveys the right to use the underlying asset for a period of time in exchange for consideration. So, in layman's term, ang lease ay rent. So, di ba sa rent, there are two people involved, yung lessor and yung lessee. Yung lessor yung nag-provide and yung lessee yung nag-obtain. Like, yung lessor yung nagpaparent, then yung lessee yung nagre-rent. So, kunyari, for example, nagparent si lessor ng car kay lessee. So, there should be a contract na nagsasaad na ibinibigay yung karapatan na gamitin yung car ni lessee for a period of time in exchange for consideration, like kunyari binayaran si lessor ng money, ganon. So to be a lease, a contract must convey the right to control the use of an identified asset. So para masabi na lease siya, dun sa contract dapat nakasaad dun yung pagbibigay ni lessor ng karapatan kay lessee na gamitin yung identified asset. So, an asset is typically identified by being explicitly specified or implicitly specified. So, kapag sinabing explicitly specified, clearly stated siya sa contract. While kapag implicitly specified naman is not clearly stated siya, magiging specified lang siya when made available to the customer. Right to control the use of an asset. So, masasabi na there is a right to control the use of an asset if the customer has the right to obtain substantially all the economic benefits from the use of the identified asset. So, for example, yung customer is, or kunyari si lessee, inupahan niya yung first floor ng building ni lessor. So, of course, dun sa first floor is maraming rooms yon. Kunyari, for example, there are 5 rooms. So, pwedeng ipa-sublease yon ni lessee. So, of course, kikita yon. And yung kikitain mula doon is exclusive lang kay lessee. Sa kanya lang lahat yung kikitain doon. Then, second, direct use of the identified asset. So, there is a right to control the use of an asset if the customer has direct use of the identified asset. So, mayroon siyang karapatan na gamitin kung paano at kung para saan mang purpose yung asset for a period of time. Financial lease model for lessee. IFRS 16 paragraph 22 provides that at the commencement date, a lessee shall recognize a right of use asset, and a lease liability. So, a lessee is required to initially recognize a right of use asset or the right to use the underlying asset over the lease term and a lease liability for the obligation to make payments. So, all leases shall be accounted for by the lessee as a finance lease under the new lease standard. Then, so what is underlying asset? Underlying asset is the subject of a lease for which the right to use that asset has been provided by the lessor to the lessee. So, yun yung underlying asset, yun yung nakasaad sa kontrata na nauupahan na pinapaupahan ng lessor. Then, lessee, ito na nga yun, yung entity that obtains the right to use an underlying asset for a period of time in exchange for consideration. So, yung lessee obtains. So, in Tagalog ng lessee, siya yung nangungupahan. So, siya yung nag-obtains, nakukuha ng karapatan na gamitin yung pinapaupahan na asset. Then, lessor, entity that provides the right to use an underlying asset for a period of time in exchange for consideration. So, eto yung lessor naman is yung nagpapaupa. So, siya yung nagpro-provide kay lessee ng asset na uupahan na siya yung nagpo-provides ng right to use ng asset niya for a period of time in exchange for consideration for like money, ganon. Operating lease model for lessee. IFRS 16 paragraph 5 provides that a lessee is permitted to make an accounting policy election to apply the operating lease accounting and not recognize an asset and lease liability in two optional exemptions. And those two optional exemptions are short-term lease and low-value lease. So, stated differently, a lessee may or may not apply the operating lease accounting if the lease is short-term or if the underlying asset is of low value. So, and paragraph 6 provides that if the lessee elects to apply the operating lease accounting under the two exemptions, the lessee shall recognize the lease payments as an expense in either a straight line basis over the lease term or another systematic basis. So, the lessee shall apply another systematic basis if this is more representative of the pattern of the lessee's benefit. So, under the operating lease model, the periodic rental is simply recognized as rent expense on the part of the lessee. Short-term lease. So, paano nga ba masasabi na short-term lang yung lease? So, yung lease is, yung term or period ng lease is 12 months or less from the commencement date. So, a lease that contains a purchase option is not a short-term lease. So, yung purchase option is the opportunity to purchase a piece of property which is being leased after the lease is completed. So, yun. So, the election for short-term lease shall be made by class of underlying asset. So, yung underlying asset ay groupings of underlying assets of similar nature and use in an entity's operations. Then, low value lease. So, ano ba yung halaga ng underlying asset para masabi na ito ay low value? So, yung bagong standard is hindi nag-provide kung magkanong halaga ba para masabi na low value yung asset. Then, low value asset is a matter of professional judgment. So, a lessee shall access the value of an underlying asset based on the value of the asset when it is new regardless of the age of the asset being leased. So, a lease of an underlying asset does not qualify as a low value lease if the nature of the asset is such that the asset is typically not of low value when new. So, for example, A lease of car would not qualify as low value lease because a new car would typically not be of low value. Kasi, syempre, sasakyan yan, malaki yan, mataas yan yung value niyan. Then, yung mga typical na low value na underlying asset, personal computers, office furniture, and equipment. So, IFRS 16 paragraph 8 provides that the election for low value lease is made on a lease by lease basis. Finance lease, lessee. So, a finance lease is a lease that transfers substantially all of the risks and the rewards incidental to ownership of an underlying asset. So, sinasabi dito na ang finance lease para siyang rent to own na after nung lease pag yung lease ay complete na, yung ownership ng underlying asset is matatransfer na dun kay lessee. Then, so at the commencement date, yung journal entry niya is debit right of use asset and then credit lease liability. So, ito yung, as stated earlier, all leases shall be accounted for by the lessee as finance lease. Initial measurement of right of use asset. So, ano nga ba yung right of use asset? So, it is an asset that represents the right of a lessee to use an underlying asset over the lease term in a finance lease. So, under IFRS 16 paragraph 23, the lessee shall measure the right of use asset at cost at commencement date. So, yung at cost, lahat ng na-incurred na gastos sa pag-obtain ng lease. So, paragraph 24 provides that the cost of right of use asset comprises present value of lease payments or initial measurement of the lease liability. Lease payments made to lessor at or before commencement date such as lease bonus, less any lease incentives received. So, yung lease incentives, yun yung payments by the lessor to the lessee associated with the lease or the reimbursement or assumption by the lessor of the cost of the lessee. So, for example, as an incentive to the lessee for entering into the lease, the lessor agrees to reimburse the lessee for the commission paid by the lessee to a broker. So, yung lease incentive should be deducted from the cost of the right of use asset. Then, initial direct costs incurred by the lessee. So, ano ba yung initial direct costs? So, yung initial direct costs are incremental costs of obtaining a lease that would not have been incurred if the lease had not been obtained. So, yung initial direct cost, na-incurred lang siya because yung lease is na-obtained. And if ever na hindi man, hindi siya mai-incur. Then, estimate of costs of dismantling, removing, and restoring the underlying asset for which the lessee has a present obligation.
So next is the subsequent measurement of right of use asset. So paano natin measure yung right of use asset subsequently or at the end of the reporting period? So according to the standard, we should use the cost model. So paano nga ba yung sa cost model? Initially, nire-record natin siya at cost. Then later on or subsequently, we should record it at the carrying amount. So paano natin makukuha yung carrying amount? Here, carrying amount is equals to cost less any accumulated depreciation and impairment loss. Moreover, the carrying amount of the right of use asset is adjusted for any remeasurement of the lease liability. So, in case of any remeasurement of the lease liability, kailangan din natin i-adjust yung carrying amount of the right of use asset. So, we also have here the journal entries na we usually nare-record natin subsequently or at the end of the reporting period. So, first, we have here we debit the depreciation and credit the accumulated depreciation. Of course, about asset naman, kapag habang tumatagal or as time goes by, nasisira yan or nagde-depreciate. So, kailangan nating i-record yung depreciation nun. And for the second entry, we debit interest expense and lease liability, then credit the cash. So of course, kapag nagre-rent, may usapan kayo na may regular payment kayo. So at the end of the reporting period, nagbayad ka ng rent mo, so we should debit the lease liability and credit the cash since nagbayad ka, mawawalan ka ng cash. And of course, sa mga utang natin or sa mga renta, palaging nandyan si interest. That is why we also debit the interest expense. Now let's go to the presentation of right of use asset. So according to the standard, the lessee shall present the right of use asset as a separate line item in the statement of financial position. So we have here an example. So from the balance sheet of ABC Testa Company Incorporation, makikita niyo yung naka-highlight, itong naka-yellow, operating ROU asset. So as you can see from here, under siya ng long-term assets or what we also call the non-current assets. So kung makikita nyo, as a separate line item siya present. Pero, nagbigay din ng standard ng isang alternative. So as an alternative, the lessee may include the ROU asset in the appropriate line item within which the corresponding underlying asset world would be presented if owned. So for example, nag-list ka ng equipment. So, kapag ka nagrenta ka ng equipment, of course, magkakaroon ka ng right of use asset doon. So, kung ipepresent mo yung right of use asset, pwede mo na siyang isama sa pag-present ng equipment. But then, a disclosure to notes to financial statement is required. Kailangan mong i-disclose doon or sabihin na sa equipment, isinama mo na or in-include mo na yung right of use asset. Other measurement models. So, ang right of use asset, it can be associated with two. First is either with investment property or with property, plant, and equipment. So, unahin natin yung sa investment property. Sa investment property, meron tayo ditong land and building. So, sinasabi na kapag ginamit mo or in-apply mo yung fair value model, right of use asset should be measured at fair value. So, of course, obvious naman na kapag fair value model yung in-apply mo, of course, i-measure mo siya at fair value. And sinasabi rin na once yun nga yung in-apply mo, kailangan lahat ng assets na mamimit yung definition ng investment property, gagamitin mo na sa lahat yung fair value model. So next is the property, plant, and equipment. Kung sa investment property, fair value model, sa PPE naman ay revaluation model. So kapag ginamit mo yun or in-apply mo naman yun, a lessee may elect to apply the revaluation model to all of the right of use assets. So parang parehas lang din dito sa investment property. Kapag ginamit mo yung revaluation model, kailangan lahat ng right of use assets under PPE or the property, plant, and equipment, gagamitin mo ay revaluation model. So as you can see, nagamit dito yung accounting principle, which is the consistency. Next is the depreciation of right of use asset. So according to the standard, the lessee shall depreciate the right of use asset over the useful life. Take note of the words useful life. Useful life of the underlying asset under the following conditions. So, dapat daw i-record ng lessee yung depreciation ng right of use asset over the useful life of the underlying asset. Pero sa dalawang kondisyon. First is transfer of ownership to the lessee. So meaning dito, di ba nirerentahan mo yung isang underlying asset. But then at the end of the reporting period, magkakaroon ng transfer of ownership, meaning sa'yo na yung underlying asset. So dito, pwedeng masabi na rent to own. Then, letter B, the lessee is reasonably certain to exercise a purchase option. So, ayun na nga, kumbaga, sigurado yung lessee na mabibili or bibilhin niya yung underlying asset at the end of the reporting period. Pero, kapag yung dalawang options ay hindi na-meet, useful life of the asset or the lease term, whichever is shorter, ang gagamitin to depreciate the right of use asset. So once again, kapag na-meet itong dalawang conditions, which are transfer of ownership to the lessee, and the lessee is reasonably certain to exercise a purchase option, ang gagamitin natin to depreciate the right of use asset is the useful life. Pero kapag hindi na-meet, useful life of the asset or the lease term, whichever is shorter. So let's go to the measurement of lease liability. So according to the standard, we use the present value of the lease payments at the commencement date. sa pagme-measure ng lease liability. Again, present value of the lease payment at the commencement date. Tapos, yung lease payment, it should be discounted at the interest rate implicit in the lease. Itong interest rate implicit in the lease, given na to sa mga problems. Pero kapag hindi ma-determine or walang given, ang gagamitin natin ay incremental borrowing rate of the lessee. So, ano yon? It is the rate of the interest that the lessee would have to pay to borrow funds necessary to obtain a similar asset over a similar term and similar security. So, simply, ito lang yung interest rate na kailangang bayaran ng lessee para makahiram siya ng funds necessary para maka-obtain siya ng kaparehas na asset. Definitions. So here are the other definitions that we may encounter as we discuss further about lessee accounting. So first is the fixed payments. These are payments made by the lessee to the lessor for the right to use an underlying asset during the term. So from the word itself, fixed, meaning hindi na siya nagbabago, fixed na. Like for example, annually you have to pay for 100,000. So yun yung rent mo to a certain underlying asset. So that is a fixed payment. Next is the variable payments. Payments that vary because of changes occurring after the commencement date other than the passage of time. So, opposite ng fixed payment, we have variable payments, meaning ito yung mga payments na nagbabago. Next is the residual value guarantee, made to the lessor by a party unrelated to the lessor that the value of an underlying asset at the end of the lease term would be at least a specified amount. So, etong residual value guarantee, mas maano natin siya kapag nagkaroon tayo ng mga problem. Pero itong residual value guarantee, nagbibigay dito ng specified amount na ginaguarantee na with this specified amount, ito yung magiging value ng underlying asset mo at the end of the lease term or hindi bababa sa amount na ginaranty ng isang party unrelated to the lessor. Next, we have the unguaranteed residual value. The realization of the residual value is not assured or is guaranteed solely by a party related to the lessor. So, ito namang unguaranteed residual value, ito yung portion ng residual value na hindi guaranteed or hindi siya naka-assured na makukuha o ma-realize at the end of the reporting period. Next is the executory cost. Ownership expenses such as maintenance, taxes, and insurance for the underlying asset. These are outright expense, so meaning the executory costs are immediately expensed when incurred. So next is the lease term. So what is lease term? In layman's term, makikita naman natin yung lease term sa isang contract or sa isang contract of lease. Kasi ito yung napagkasundaan na period or kung gaanong katagal yung pagpaparenta or yung pagrerenta mo ng isang underlying asset. But according to the definition, it is a non-cancelable period for which the lessee has the right to use the underlying asset together with both of the following. So again, it is a non-cancelable period daw. Meaning, kapag na-violate or kinancel mo yung lease term, then it would lead to breach of contract. So again, lease term is the non-cancelable period for which the lessee has the right to use the underlying asset together with both of the following. So ito, yung dalawang kasama pa sa lease term. First is period by an option to extend the lease if the lessee is reasonably certain to exercise the extension option. So kapag sigurado yung lessee na exercise niya yung isang extension option, then yung period by an option to extend the lease ay kasama din sa lease term. And then the next one or the last one, if the lessee naman ay reasonably certain or sigurado not to exercise the termination option, yung period covered by an option to terminate the lease ay kasama din sa lease term. So again, ang lease term ay non-cancelable period, meaning kapag violate, maglilid siya sa breach of contract. So lease term, ito yung mga napagkasundaan na term kung or period or scope kung gaanong kahaba or katagal ipaparent or i-rent yung isang underlying asset.
Illustration: transfer of title to lessee. On January 1, 2021, an entity leased a machinery for 4 years, which is the same as the useful life of the machinery at annual rental of fixed payment of 100,000 payable at the end of each year. So we have here the present value computation. So the present value of annual payment of 100,000 for 4 years is determined using a 12% implicit interest rate. So to get the present value, we need to multiply the 100% by the present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 for 4 years at 12%. So we have 100,000 multiplied by 3.0373 na nakuha natin from the mathematical table of present value and annuity. So we will get 303,730. So and we have here the journal entry to record the finance lease at the commencement date of the lease. So we debit right of use asset amounting to 303,730 and credit lease liability amounting to 303,730. Depreciation of right of use asset. So tinutukoy rito na the depreciation of the right of use asset is based on the useful life of the underlying asset kapag yung lease transfers ownership of the underlying asset to the lessee at the end of the lease term. So accordingly, the annual depreciation of the right of use asset is normally recorded by debiting depreciation amounting to 75,932 and crediting accumulated depreciation amounting to 75,932. So paano ba natin nakuha tong amount na to? So we just need to multiply the present value by 4 years. So 303,730 divided by 4 years is equals to 75,932. So accounting for fixed payment. So the annual rental or fixed payment of 100,000 shall be treated as payment for the principal lease liability and the interest thereon. So para makuha natin yung interest, we just need to subtract the face amount of gross fixed payment by the present value. So 400,000 less 303,730 is equals to 96,270. So the interest of 96,270 is recognized as an expense over the lease term following the effective interest method of amortization. So here we have the table of amortization. So paano nga ba natin nakuha yung mga value na nandoon sa table of amortization natin? So yung payment, yun yung annual rental or fixed payment na 100,000 na babayaran natin every year. So yung para makuha yung interest, we will just multiply the preceding present value by 12% interest rate. Yung ito yung for 2021, 303,730 multiplied by 12% is equals to 36,448. So yung pag sinabi kasi natin preceding present value, yun yung parang yung before. So yung kunyari, yung 2021, yung before niya yung 2020. Then yung para makuha naman natin yung principal, we have to subtract the rental payment by the interest. So 100,000 less 36,448 is equals to 63,552. Then yung present value para makuha siya ay i-subtract rin natin yung lease liability by the annual principal payment. So 303,730 less 63,552 is equals to 240,178. So yun yung present value. Then para naman sa journal entries for 2021, sa December 31, 2021, we debit interest expense of 36,448, debit lease liability amounting to 63,552, and credit cash by 100,000. Then for journal entries for December 31, 2022, we debit interest expense amounting to 28,821, then debit lease liability of 71,179, then credit cash of 100,000. Presentation. If a statement of financial position is prepared on December 31, 2021, the right-of-use asset would be reported as a separate line item under non-current asset. So, under siya ng non-current asset kasi a right-of-use asset represents lessee's authority to utilize a lease item, typically property or equipment, over the duration of an agreed upon lease term. So, in other words, the lessee is granted the right to obtain the economic benefit from the usage of an asset owned by another entity. So, yun nga. So, ito na yun. So, right-of-use asset amounting to 303,730 less the accumulated depreciation na 75,932, we will have the carrying amount of 227,798. Illustration of certain purchase options. So, on January 1, 2021, lessee company leased a machine with the following pertinent information. So, fixed rental payment at the end of each year amounting to 1 million. Then, lease term of 10 years, useful life of machine 12 years, incremental borrowing rate of 14%, implicit interest rate of 12%, present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 per 10 periods at 14%, which is 5.216, and 12%, which is 5.650. Then, present value of 1 for 10 periods at 14%, which is 0.270. Then, 12%, which is 0.322. Lessee company had the option to purchase the machine upon the lease expiration on January 1, 2031 by paying 500,000. The lessee is reasonably certain to exercise the purchase option at the commencement date of the lease. So, the estimated residual value of the machine at the end of the 12-year useful life is 600,000. Cost of right-of-use asset. So, paano nga ba natin makukuha yung cost ng right-of-use asset? So, we just have to add the present value of these payments by the present value of purchase option. Then, para makuha yung present value of lease payments, we just need to multiply the fixed rental payment at the end of each year by the present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 for 10 periods at 12%. Then, para makuha yung present value of purchase option, we will just need to multiply the purchase option, which is the 500,000, by the present value of 1 for 10 periods at 12% na 0.322. So, we will get 161,000. So, 5,650,000 plus 161,000 is equals to 5,811,000. So, yun na yun, yung total lease liability. So, and note that the present value factor applicable to 12% is used in computing the present value of the lease payment. So, the lease payments shall be discounted using the 12% implicit interest rate. So here is the journal entries. So, first, to record the acquisition of the machinery under a finance lease. So, ito yung kinompute natin kanina. So, we debit right of use asset amounting to 5,811,000 and we credit lease liability amounting to 5,811,000. So, second, to record the first rental payment on December 31, 2021. So, we debit interest expense amounting to 697,320 na nakuha natin from multiplying the 5,811,000 or yung present value by 12%. So, then we debit lease liability amounting to 302,680 na nakuha natin from subtracting the payment on December 31, 2021 na 1 million by the interest for 2021 na 697,320. Then, we credit cash amounting to 1 million. So, then, eto naman, para makuha natin yung lease liability for December 31, 2021, yung lease liability from January 1, 2021 ay ililess lang natin sa principal payment na 302,680. So, yun, we will get the 5,508,320. Then, third, to record the annual depreciation. So, we debit depreciation amounting to 434,250 and we credit accumulated depreciation amounting to 434,250. No, nakuha natin from dividing the 5,211,000 by 12. So, the asset is depreciated over the useful life because there is a purchase option that is reasonably certain to be exercised. So, here we have the table of amortization. So, kanina meron din ganito. Then, kaya tayo nag-arrive sa mga value na to kasi yung sa payment, yun yung it represents the fixed annual rental payment. So, yung interest is equal to the preceding present value multiplied by 12%. So, yung, for example, yung sa 2021, 5,811,000 times 12% is equals to 697,320. Then, the principal is equal to the payment minus the interest. So, on December 31, 2021, yung 1 million minus 697,320 is equals to 302,680. Then, yung present value is the balance of the lease liability, which is the preceding present value minus the principal payment. So, on December 31, 2021, 5,811,000 minus 302,680 is equals to 5,508,320. Exercise of the purchase options. When the purchase option is exercised on January 1, 2031, which is the lease expiration, the journal entry to record the payment is we debit lease liability amounting to 500,000 and we credit cash amounting to 500,000. So, ito yung journal entries na dapat natin gawin if ever na ma-exercise yung purchase options. Then, if ever naman na so, we have here naman na yung non-exercise of purchase option. So, however, if any reason the purchase option is not exercised, a loss is recognized equals to the difference between the carrying amount of the right-of-use asset and the lease liability on January 1, 2031. So, ito yung journal entries niya. So, we debit accumulated depreciation amounting to 4,342,500. We debit lease liability amounting to 500,000 and we debit loss on finance lease amounting to 968,500. And lastly, we credit right-of-use asset amounting to 5,811,000. So, para makuha yung loss on finance lease, yung right-of-use asset is ileless natin sa accumulated depreciation. na yung 434,000 to 150,000 times 10 years. Then, we will have 4,342,500. So, pag niles natin yung 5,811,000 sa 4,342,500, we will have we will have a carrying amount of 1,468,500. So, yun yung carrying amount natin ng January 1, 2031. So, yung lease liability naman from January 1, 2031 ay ilales natin sa carrying amount from January 1, 2031 din. So, we will get a total amount of 968,500. Illustration na residual value guarantee. So, before that, ano nga ba ang ibig sabihin ng residual value guarantee? So, it is a promise made by the lessee that the lessor can sell the lease asset at the end of the lease for a guaranteed amount. So, since this promise is a potential future payment, it must be included in the calculation of the present value of the lessee's future lease payments. So, here we have the illustration. So, on January 1, 2021, Easy Company leased an equipment with the following information. So, fixed annual payment at the end of each lease year amounting to 1 million, lease term of 4 years, useful life of equipment of 5 years, implicit interest rate of 10%, present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 for 4 periods at 10%, 3.16987, and present value of 1 for 4 periods at 10% na 0.683. So, Easy Company guaranteed a 200,000 residual value on December 31, 2024 to the lessor. So, as long as there is a residual value guarantee, there is no more purchase option because the equipment shall revert to the lessor upon the expiration of the lessee on December 31, 2024. So, cost of right of use asset. So, para makuha yung cost of right of use asset and lease liability, we need to add the present value of lease payments from the present value of residual guarantee. So, yung present value of lease payments amounts to 3,169,870 and yung present value of residual guarantee is 136,600. So, 3,169,870 plus 136,600 is equals to 3,306,470 cost of right of use asset and lease liability. So, paano nga ba natin nakuha yung present value of lease payment? So, nakuha natin yun by multiplying the fixed annual payment at the end of each lease year by the present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 per 4 periods at 10% na 3.16987. So, equals niya ay 3,169,870. So, para makuha naman yung present value of residual guarantee, we will multiply the residual value na 200,000 by the present value of 1 for 4 persons at 10%. Now, so 200,000 times 0.683 is equals to 136,600. So, here we have the table of amortization. So, like yung kanina lang. So, here is the computation para makuha yung principal and lease liability for December 31, 2021. So, para makuha yung applicable to principal, yung principal, yung payment ay ileless sa interest expense. So, 1 million less 330,647 is equals to 669,353. Then, para makuha naman yung lease liability for December 31, 2021, ay ile-less natin yung lease liability or present value on January 1, 2021 by the principal payment. So, 3,306,470 less 669,353 is equals to 2,637,117. So here we have the journal entries to record the transactions. So first, to record the acquisition of the equipment, we debit right of use asset amounting to 3,306,470 and we credit lease liability amounting to 3,306,470. Then second, to record the first annual payment on December 31, 2021. So we debit interest expense amounting to 330,647. We debit lease liability of 669,353 and we credit cash amounting to 1 million. Then lastly, to record the annual depreciation, we debit depreciation amounting to 776,617 and we credit accumulated depreciation amounting 776,617. So the depreciable amount is equal to 3,306,470 minus the residual value guarantee of 200,000 or yun nga yung 3,106,470. So the asset is depreciated over the lease term of 4 years, which is shorter than the useful life of 5 years because there is neither a transfer of title nor a reasonably certain purchase option. Then,
now let's discuss the journal entries we need to record for the return of equipment to lessor on December 31, 2024. So this is still connected to the previous illustration, yung kay Easy Company. So first is to record the final annual payment on December 31, 2024. So ito yung journal entry for that. We debit interest expense amounting to 109,090 pesos and debit lease liability amounting to 890,910 pesos and credit cash amounting to 1 million. So, yung mga amount naman dito ay na-explain na or makikita nyo na dun sa table of amortization kanina na diniscuss ni Ms. Riza. So, let's move on to the second journal entry. To record the return of the equipment to the lessor. So, dito na yung pagbabalik na mismo ng equipment sa lessor. So, we debit accumulated depreciation amounting to 3,106,470. So, paano nakuha yun? We just multiply 776,617, which is the annual depreciation of the underlying asset, to 4 years. So, 4 years in yung lease term. So, again, 776,617 pesos times 4 or 4 years is equals to 3,106,470 pesos. So, that is for the accumulated depreciation. Next, we also debit the lease liability amounting to 200,000. So, as you can remember, dun sa illustration, ginaranti ni lessee or ni Easy Company yung lessor na sa December 31, 2024, there will be a residual value guarantee of 200,000. So, dito, hindi na niya kailangang bayaran yung 200,000. I-debit lang natin yung lease liability dahil ibabalik lang naman natin yung equipment. That is why we just need to satisfy that liability for the residual value guarantee of 200,000. Next is we credit the right of use asset amounting to 3,306,470 pesos. So this is the cost of the ROU. Kaya i-credit na natin siya kasi nga ibabalik na. Then note, if the fair value of the underlying asset is less than the residual value guarantee, a loss is reported. So dito sa number 2, ang fair value ng ROU ay 200,000 kasi kunin natin yung difference of the ROU and the accumulated depreciation, that would amount to 200,000. So, nag-equal lang siya dun sa dapat na residual value guarantee. So, there wouldn't be a loss in there. Pero, if, for example, ang fair value ay 150,000 lang, tapos ang kailangan nating residual value guarantee ay 200,000. So, kung kukunin natin yung difference, of course, there would be a difference of 50,000. Then, i-record natin siya as debit to loss on finance lease, then credit to cash. So, if there is a loss, kailangan natin ng cash payment to make up for that loss. So now, let's move on to the next illustration about the initial direct cost. So ito yung given problem. On January 1, 2021, Simple Company lists an equipment with the following information. So you can just pause the video to read the following information. So here is the computation for the initial direct cost. Unahin natin kunin yung cost of right of use asset. So to get that, we must get the amount of lease liability as of January 1, 2021, and that amounts to 4,516,280 pesos. So paano natin nakuha yung amount ng lease liability? To get that, we just added the present value of rentals and the present value of residual value guarantee. So unahin natin yung pagkuha ng amount ng present value of rentals. So to get that, we will multiply 1 million to 4.3121. So, ano yung 1 million dito? Yung 1 million from the given information, ito yung annual fixed payment of the equipment in advance at the beginning of each lease year. Then, yung 4.3121 is the present value of an annuity of 1 in advance at 8% for 5 periods. So, dun siya nakuha. And that will give us an amount of 4,312,100. So next is the present value of residual value guarantee. We just multiply 300,000 to 0.6806. So yung 300,000, ito naman yung residual value guarantee, given na rin siya dun sa table. Then the 0.6806 is the present value of 1 at 8% for 5 periods. So that will give us an amount of 204,180. So again, to get the lease liability of January 1, 2021, we will just add the two present value. And that will give us again 4,516,280. So to get the cost of right of use asset, i-add natin yung initial direct cost and we will less the lease incentive received. So 4,516,280, add natin yung 250,000, then deduct natin yung 150,000, that will give us to an amount of 4,616,280. So, we must take note na kapag kinukuha natin or minimeasure natin yung cost of right of use asset, laging kasama ang initial direct cost at saka lease incentive received. Pero pagka yung measurement naman ay for the lease liability, hindi nakasama yung dalawa. So, ayan lang. Lagi nating tandaan na the initial direct cost is added and the lease incentive received is deducted in computing the cost of right of use asset. So, ayun na nga yung ginawa natin kanina. So, for the net cash payment at the start of the lease, so ito yung una nating bayad. Para makuha yan, ile-less lang natin or i-deduct lang natin yung lease incentive received, which amounts to 150,000 sa initial direct cost of 250,000. So, to get the difference, magkakaroon tayo ng 100,000. And that will be the net cash payment at the start of the lease. For the journal entries of year 2021. So first, to record the acquisition of the equipment under a finance lease. So dito, we debit the right of use asset amounting to 4,606,280. So, yung amount nito, kanina ay na-discuss na natin sa computation ng initial direct cost, which is the cost of right of use asset. Then, we credit the lease liability, 4,516,280, and the cash amounting to 100,000. So, yung mga amount naman dito ay na-discuss na natin dun sa computation kanina sa initial direct cost. So, next na tayo. Second is to record the first payment on January 1, 2021. We debit lease liability and credit cash amounting to 1 million. Kasi nga nagbayad na tayo, syempre mawawala na tayo ng utang and naglabas tayo ng pera. So, yung 1 million na amount ay given na siya kasi sinabi na may annual fixed payment in advance at the beginning of each lease year amounting to 1 million. That is why 1 million yung first payment or yung amount ng first payment for January 1, 2021. So next is to accrue the interest for 2021 on December 31, 2021. So ito naman yung mga entries sa end of the reporting period na. So we must record the accrual of the interest. We debit interest expense and credit accrued interest payable amounting to 281,302. So, paano natin nakuha yung amount na yun? Let's go dito sa table of amortization. So, the present value of the underlying asset is 4,516,280 noong January 1, 2021. Then, nagbayad tayo at the beginning of the year ng 1 million. So, idededuct natin yun. Magiging 3,516,280 na lang. So, from that present value, doon natin kukunin yung 8% or the implicit interest rate of 8%. So, to get that, ang makukuha natin ay 281,302. So, doon natin nakuha yung amount ng interest expense. So, for the number 4, to record the depreciation for 2021. So, syempre, pag end of reporting period, may depreciation na nangyari na doon. So, we must debit depreciation amounting to 863,256 and accumulated depreciation credit 863,256 din. So, paano naman natin nakuha yung amount? You may be wondering kung saan natin nakuha yung 4,316,280 at saka yung 5. So, doon muna tayo sa 4,316,280. Diba, pag usual depreciation ng mga asset, para makuha natin yung annual depreciation niya, ima-minus muna natin siya sa scrap value. So, dito naman, ima-minus natin yung residual value guarantee sa cost. So, 4,616,280 less 300,000 will give us an amount of 4,316,280. So, itong amount na to, ang i-divide natin sa 5. So, yung 5, ito yung lease term. So, bakit lease term? Kung naalala nyo doon sa discussion natin nung previous slides, kapag gagamitin natin ang useful life years ng depreciation, kapag lang na-meet niya yung dalawang condition, which is the transfer of ownership, at saka kapag certain yung lessee na mag-exercise siya ng purchase option. Pero dito, since may residual value guarantee, ibig sabihin lang, hindi sure na magkakaroon ng transfer of ownership or hindi magkakaroon ng exercise of purchase option. That is why, di ba kapag hindi yun na-meet, ang kailangan natin gamitin ay useful life or the lease term, whichever is shorter. So, dito sa illustration, ang lease term ay 5 years and the useful life of years ay 6 years. So, which is shorter, of course, the lease term. So, kaya ang gagamitin natin ay yung 5 years. So, again, to get the depreciation or the amount of the depreciation, 4,316,280 divided by 5 is 863,256. Let's go now to the year of 2022. Now, for the year 2022, here are the journal entries. So first, to record the second payment on January 1, 2022. Since ito na yung second year of the lease term, kailangan na natin magbayad ng pangalawang payment. So, we will pay cash of 1 million, kaya credit cash 1 million. Then debit accrued interest payable amounting to 281,302. So ito yung inaccrue natin na interest noong December 31, 2021. Since nabayaran na, ite-debit na natin siya. Then the lease liability amounting to 718,698. The next is to accrue the interest for 2022 on December 31, 2022. So, another accrual of the interest. Diba nung December 31, nag-accrue tayo? Then this year, 2022, we must also record accrual of interest. So debit interest expense and credit accrued interest payable amounting to 223,807. So paano naman natin nakuha yung amount na yun? So mula noong January 1, 2022, ang present value na lang ng underlying asset natin ay 2,797,582 since nabawasan na natin ng lease liability na 718,698. So, from that amount, 2,797,582, doon natin kukunin, o yun yung magiging base natin to get the 8% or to get the implicit interest rate of 8%. So, ang 8% ng amount na yun ay 223,807. That is why, yun yung amount na ginamit natin for this accrual. So, for the third entry, to record the depreciation for 2022. So, annually, we must record depreciation. That is why we debit depreciation and credit accumulated depreciation amounting to 863,256. So, iisa lang yung magiging amount natin for every depreciation each year. Ngayon, January 1, 2026 na. So, this is the lease expiration. So, the equipment is returned by the lessee to the lessor. Kailangan nang ibalik yung equipment sa lessor. So, on such date, fair value of the asset is 400,000 and the guaranteed residual value is 300,000. So, as you can see, the fair value of the asset is greater than the guaranteed residual value. So, there wouldn't be a loss. Kaya, hindi na kailangang i-account yun. So, in such case, the equipment is simply returned by the lessee to the lessor. So, ito yung entries natin for that. Or entry natin for that. We debit accumulated depreciation. So, ang annual depreciation natin ay 863,256. Multiply natin sa lease term na 5 years. So, that will give us 4,316,280. Then, debit the lease liability, 277,748. Accrued interest payable, 22,252. So, makikita natin yung account ditong dalawang to, dun ulit sa table of amortization. Then, lastly is to credit the right of use asset since ibabalik na nga yung equipment, amounting to 4,616,280 or the cost itself of the right of use asset. Here is another illustration for unguaranteed residual value naman. So, this is the problem. On January 2, 2021, Ezi Company leased a warehouse with the following information. So, ito yung information. Nilagay ko na siya sa table. So, you can just pause the video again para mabasa yung maayos yung information. Now, for the additional information, the lease provides for neither a transfer of title to the lessee nor a purchase option. So, walang transfer of title to the lessee at purchase option na provide yung lease. Therefore, the equipment shall revert to the lessor or yung equipment ay kailangan bumalik dun sa lessor. So now, here is the computation for the total cost of right of use kapag may given na unguaranteed residual value. So first, lease liability. So para makuha natin yung amount na 2,616,000, we multiply 600,000 to 4.36. So yung 600,000 dito ay given na dun sa problem. It is the annual rental payable at the end of each year. And yung 4.36 is the present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 at 10% for 6 periods. So, kaya naging 2,616,000. The next, payment to lessor to obtain a long-term lease amounting to 224,000. So, that is given na rin dun sa problem. The next is the present value of restoration cost amounting to 400,000. So, how did we get 400,000? We multiply 634,920 to 0.63. So, yung 634,920 is the cost of restoring the asset as required by contract. Then, yung 0.63, it is the present value rate ng restoration cost. So, Yung tatlong yun ay ipag-a-add natin lahat para makuha natin yung total cost of right of use. So, ang total amount ay 3,240,000. So, the present value of the residual value is not included in the lease liability because it is unguaranteed. So, hindi natin isasama yung present value of the residual value sa pagkuha or sa pag-measure ng lease liability dahil unguaranteed siya. So, meaning, isasama lang natin yung present value ng residual value sa lease liability once it is guaranteed, katulad ng ginawa natin sa previous discussions. Next, the restoration cost must be required by contract or law and included in the cost of the right of use asset at present value. So, yung restoration cost daw ay kailangan required by contract. So, dun sa given, nakastate naman doon na yung cost of restoring the asset ay required by contract. And kapag kukunin natin yung amount niya, it should be at present value. Then last is, the annual executory cost is treated as outright expense. So, makikita natin to sa mga susunod na slides na ipapakita yung journal entries. So, ito na, journal entries for 2021. First, to record the acquisition of the warehouse under a finance lease. So, we debit right of use asset amounting to 3,240,000. So, itong amount na to, ito yung nakuha natin kanina dun sa previous slide na total cost of right of use. Then, we credit lease liability amounting to 2,616,000. Credit cash, 224,000, and credit estimated liability for restoration amounting to 400,000. So, yung mga amount naman na to ay yung kanina ng kinumpute natin. Then, second entry, to record the payment of executory costs. Just like what I have said earlier, yung executory cost is an outright expense. That is why we debit executory costs amounting to 50,000 and credit cash 50,000. Third, to record the first rental payment on December 31, 2021. So, sa given, ang payment natin or annual rental payable at the end of each year is 600,000. That is why we credit cash 600,000 since nagbayad na tayo. Then, i-debit natin yung interest expense amounting to 261,600. So, nakuha natin yan by getting the 10% of 2,616,000. So, yung 2,616,000 is the lease liability. Then, kukunin natin yung 10% nun. So, yung 10% is the implicit interest rate. Then, credit the lease liability amounting to 338,400. So, it is just the difference of the cash and the interest expense. Fourth, to record the depreciation for 2021. So, ito na yung sa end of the reporting period. Magre-record na tayo ng depreciation. So, we debit depreciation amounting to 540,000 and credit accumulated depreciation with the same amount. So, nakuha natin yung amount na to by dividing 3,240,000 to 6. So, yung 3,240,000, ito yung amount ng right of use asset natin. Then, i-divide natin sa 6 or sa 6 years, which is the lease term. So, depreciation is based on the lease term of 6 years, which is shorter than the useful life of 8 years because there is neither a transfer of title nor a purchase option. So, di ba kanina sa illustration, nabanggit dun na walang mangyayaring transfer of title or purchase option. That is why, ang magiging base natin sa depreciation ay yung lease term o yung mas maliit between useful life or lease term. Since sa given natin or sa problem natin, ang mas maliit ay yung lease term with 6 years, yun yung gagamitin natin. Then, the unguaranteed residual value is ignored in computing the depreciable amount. So, i-ignore lang natin yung unguaranteed residual value in getting the depreciable amount. So, number 5, to record the interest on the liability for restoration cost for 2021. So, we debit here interest expense amounting to 32,000 and credit estimated liability for restoration with the same amount. So, nakuha natin yung 32,000 by getting the 8% of 400,000. So, yung 400,000, ito yung kaninang present value of restoration cost natin. Then, the 8% is the discount rate for the restoration cost. So, kaya natin kinuha yung 8% ng 400,000. And that amounts to 32,000. Next is the return of equipment to lessor. So, ibabalik na yung equipment dun sa lessor. Ang date dito ay January 1, 2027. So, kapag binalik natin, of course, i-credit natin yung equipment since mawawala na sa atin yun, amounting to 3,240,000, which is the cost of the right-of-use asset. Then, debit yung accumulated depreciation amounting to 3,240,000. So, ayan, kung paano nakuha, 540,000 times 6, or yung lease term na 6 years. Then, payment of liability for restoration cost. So, January 1, 2027, we debit estimated liability for restoration amounting to 634,920. Then, just simply credit the cash since nagbayad nga tayo amounting to 634,920 pesos din, of course. Lastly, we have actual purchase of underlying asset. So, under finance lease naman, a lessee can actually purchase an underlying asset. So, para makuha natin kung magkano yung cost of the asset purchased, this is the formula. So, cost of the asset purchase is equals to the carrying amount of the leased asset plus cash payment less the balance of the lease liability. So, may example tayo dyan. Here is the example. An entity purchased an equipment that it had been leasing under a finance lease for 4 million pesos. The balance of certain accounts on the date of actual purchase were right-of-use asset 5 million, accumulated appreciation 1,500,000, and lease liability amounting to 3,800,000. So, punta tayo sa journal entry niya. We debit equipment amounting to 3,700,000. So, ito na yung mismong cost ng asset na pinurchase natin, which is yung equipment nga. So, paano natin nakuha yung 3,700,000? So, here is the computation for that. So, according to the formula, first, kukunin natin yung carrying amount of the leased asset. So, para makuha natin yun, kunin natin yung amount ng right-of-use asset, which is 5 million. Then, ilaless natin yung accumulated depreciation amounting to 1,500,000. So, that will give us 3,500,000. So, ayun na yung carrying amount niya. Then, i-add natin yung cash payment amounting to 4 million. So, 3,500,000 plus 4 million is equals to 7,500,000. Then, sabi, i-less daw yung balance ng lease liability. Then, sa given, ang lease liability ay 3,800,000. So, the difference would be 3,700,000. And that would be the cost of equipment actually purchased. So, balik tayo sa journal entry, debit equipment, 3,700,000. I-debit din natin yung accumulated depreciation amounting to 1.5 million. Then, lease liability, 3.8 million. Then, i-credit na natin yung right-of-use asset amounting to 5 million. And yung binayad natin, which is cash, amounting to 4 million. That's all for this chapter. We hope that you have learned something from us.
And thank you for watching!